Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, broke the Roman Republic, and stared down armies that wanted him dead. But his most dangerous enemy wasn't on a battlefield. It was at his table, because the hand that helped end Caesar's life may have belonged to the son he never publicly claimed. The room is louder than it should be. Not shouting, not chaos, just too many voices, too close together. Bouncing off stone walls like heat, it's the Senate House in Rome. And on this morning, the air feels tight. Men in white togas shift and whisper. Sandals scrape. Someone laughs a little too loudly, like they're trying to prove they're not nervous. Then Julius Caesar walks in. He's not wearing armor. He's not surrounded by a battlefield. He's doing what powerful men do when they think the world is already theirs. He's showing up to be obeyed, and for a moment, it looks normal. But this is one of those moments in history where normal is a costume, a performance. Because inside this room, the decision has already been made. Caesar is going to die today. Here's the part people miss. Caesar had enemies everywhere. He'd been at war most of his life. He'd crushed rivals, outsmarted generals, survived political traps that would have destroyed anyone else. So if Rome wanted him dead, why does this death feel different? Why does it feel personal? Because the most dangerous enemy in that room is not the man who hates him the most. It's the man who knows him. The man who has sat close enough to hear him speak quietly, close enough to receive favors, close enough to feel chosen, close enough to feel like family. And that's why this murder doesn't land like politics. It lands like betrayal. The Senate House is set up for speeches, not violence. The seating is tight. The space is intimate. You can't hide in a room like this. Everyone is in arm's reach of everyone else, which is exactly the point. As Caesar moves deeper inside, people stand, making space for him. He nods, calm, confident. This is Rome. This is his stage. But look closer. The men around him aren't just senators. They're the survivors of a civil war. They're the people Caesar defeated and then forgave. They're men who owe him their lives, their careers, their second chances. And sometimes the most toxic emotion in politics isn't hate. It's debt, because debt makes proud people feel small. It makes powerful people feel owned. And Caesar has been collecting debts for years. He did it with victories. He did it with mercy. He did it by lifting certain men up so publicly that everyone could see who their success belonged to. There's a reason the word father matters in Rome, not in the soft, modern way. Not father-like warmth and comfort. In ancient Rome, father means power. It means control. It means the right to decide your future. So when people around Caesar start treating him like a father figure, to Rome like the man who protects the state, feeds the crowds, decides what's next, it doesn't just flatter him, it threatens everyone else, because it quietly suggests something terrifying, that Caesar is no longer just a politician. He's becoming the kind of man you can't vote out. And the more Caesar feels untouchable, the more his enemies don't think in terms of elections. They think in terms of removal. But even then, assassination is not easy. Not in a city full of spies. Not when Caesar has loyal soldiers. Not when Caesar's name alone can start riots. If you're going to kill Julius Caesar, you need more than a knife. You need a story. You need a reason that sounds noble, You need a face that looks clean. You need someone the public can believe. And that's where the word son enters the story. Because when we hear son, we imagine DNA, a family tree, a private relationship. Rome didn't always mean it that way. In Rome, son could mean blood, yes, but it could also mean something else. Adoption, mentorship, political grooming, a public bond that's almost stronger than biology. A son could be someone you raise, or someone you create, someone you forgive and elevate, until the whole city sees him as your reflection. Someone who starts to wonder if he's supposed to inherit your world, or save the world from you. And in that room, on that morning, there is a man like that. A man whose name still makes people argue. 2,000 years later, a man remembered not as a jealous enemy, but as an honorable one, which should make you uncomfortable. Because honorable and murder aren't supposed to sit in the same sentence. So how does a respected Roman end up standing over Caesar with a blade? What would make him do it? Here's what we do know. Caesar didn't walk into this room clueless. He's been warned. Not once. Multiple times. In Rome, rumors travel faster than soldiers. Someone always hears something. Someone always knows someone. There are whispers of danger. There are bad signs. There are friends who beg him not to go. Even later, history will pile on the drama prophecies, omens, all of it. But you don't need supernatural signs to understand this moment. All you need is human psychology. When you've won as many times as Caesar has won, you stop believing the rules apply to you. And when you've forgiven as many enemies as Caesar has forgiven, you start to believe you've purchased their loyalty. Because in Caesar's mind, mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is a leash. But leash is snapped as Caesar reaches his seat. The men around him close in, not like attackers, like colleagues, like they want a favor, like they want a signature, like this is just another day in Roman politics. That's the genius of the trap in a room built for conversation. The killers can stand close without looking suspicious. They can surround him without calling it a surround. They can hide the moment of violence inside the normal rhythm of public life. And Caesar, being Caesar, allows it. Because he's used to people leaning toward him. That's what power does. It pulls people in. It makes them want something. Now picture it. Caesar is seated. He's the center. Everyone is watching. A man steps forward, then another, and another. The space tightens. Caesar looks up, slightly annoyed, like a leader who thinks. He's about to be interrupted by something small, and then it starts. Not a single dramatic strike like in the movies. It's messy. It's sudden. It's closed. At first, Caesar doesn't understand what's happening, because the brain doesn't accept betrayal quickly. Your mind searches for another explanation. A mistake, a joke, a scuffle. But then comes the brutal clarity. These men are not reaching toward him to plead. They're reaching toward him to end him. And that's when the emotional center of this story hits. Not the violence. The recognition. Caesar begins to see faces. Faces he knows. Faces he has trusted. Faces he has trusted. Faces he has forgiven. Men he has protected. Men who have eaten at his table and walked beside him. Through Rome like they belonged there. And somewhere inside that storm of movement, One face matters more than the rest. Because if Caesar can't trust him, then what does loyalty even mean? What does friendship mean? What does family mean? This is why the assassination shakes the world. Not because a ruler died. Rome is full of dead rulers. It shakes the world because it reveals something colder. That political relationships can look like love right up until the moment they become a weapon. And the men who planned this aren't just trying to kill Caesar. They're trying to control the meaning of his death. They want Rome to see them as saviors. They want applause. They want the crowd to say, "Finally, we are free." But in the next hours, they're going to learn something that will destroy them. You can stab a man to death and still lose the story, because Rome doesn't respond the way they expect. Instead of celebration, there's fear. Instead of relief, there's panic. Because when you kill the most powerful man alive, you don't create freedom automatically. You create a vacuum, and vacuums don't stay empty. That's the promise of this video. We're not just going to watch Caesar die. We're going to follow the relationship that made his death feel like a family betrayal. We're going to look at what son meant in Rome bled. Adoption, mentorship, legacy, and why those meanings can turn love into violence. And by the end, you'll see something even darker. Caesar's murder didn't end his power. It multiplied it. Because the day Caesar falls is the day the fight over his name begins. So the real question isn't just who stabbed Julius Caesar. The real question is, why did one of the closest men in his life decide Rome needed Caesar dead even if it meant becoming the villain in someone else's story? And who benefits when Caesar is gone? Hold on to that, because the answer isn't in the knives, it's in the word we keep avoiding: son. If you want to understand why Caesar's death felt like family, you have to understand something about Rome that sounds strange to us today. In Rome, family wasn't mainly about love. It was about power. It was law. It was status. It was survival. And it all started with one idea that ruled Roman life, like gravity, the paterfamilias. That word basically means the father of the household. But don't picture a modern dad making pancakes. Picture a man who is the legal center of an entire mini-kingdom. The paterfamilias controlled the family's money, the property, the marriages, the social connections, the future in the most traditional sense. Everyone under him, children, wives, even adult sons, were part of his authority. So when Romans talked about fatherhood, they weren't only talking about biology, they were talking about control. And when Romans talked about sons, they weren't only talking about who you were born to, they were talking about who you belonged to. That's why this story is so dangerous, because if Caesar could position himself as Rome's father, then the Republic starts to look less like a government and more like a household, with one man in charge. Now, here's the twist that makes everything click. In Rome, you could become someone's son without being related by blood. That wasn't an exception, it was a strategy. Adoption in Rome wasn't mostly about taking care of an orphan. It was often about building a political future. If you didn't have the right heir, or if you wanted a stronger one, you could legally adopt a young man, bring him into your family, and pass your name and legacy to him, and the whole city would treat that legal connection like it was real in the only way Rome truly cared about: publicly, on paper, in power, in a world where your family name is your brand. Adoption could change everything overnight. A young man could go from promising to inevitable, from someone to the next man. And the moment that happens, everyone starts doing a new kind of math in their head. Who's rising? Who's falling? Who's protected? Who's exposed? In Rome, legacy was currency. If your name was respected, doors opened. If your name was feared, doors opened even faster. If your name was hated, well, that could still be useful too, as long as people were afraid to touch you. So when Caesar becomes the most powerful man in the Roman world, he doesn't just become a political leader, he becomes a problem the system has never solved peacefully. What happens when one man is bigger than the Republic? Because think about it. Rome's Republic was designed to stop kings. That was the whole point. Power was supposed to be shared, rotated, limited. No single man should become permanent. But Caesar is permanent in the way that scares people. He has money. He has popularity. He has soldiers who are loyal to him personally. He has political talent. He has the aura of destiny, even when he plays by the rules. He bends them just by standing near them, so the people around him start using family language. Not because they're being poetic, because they're describing what they're witnessing. A patrona protector, a father of the state. And if Caesar is the father, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Who is the son? Because Rome is obsessed with succession, not in a sentimental way, in a terrified way. Succession is what keeps the world from burning, or what lights it on fire. Now, we need to talk about another kind of family that mattered just as much as blood. The patron system. In Rome, society ran on networks. If you were powerful, you became a patron. You gave protection, favors, jobs, legal help, money in return. People supported you. They voted how you wanted. They defended you in public. They showed up for you. This relationship could be so strong that it looked like family from the outside. A patron was almost like a political father. A rare client was almost like a political son. And here's the key psychological detail. Rome didn't just reward loyalty. It demanded it. If a patron lifted you up, you were expected to be grateful. You were expected to return the favor. You were expected to stand with him when things got ugly. So when Caesar forgives former enemies and then gives them positions and honors, it looks like generosity, but it also creates a web of men whose careers are stamped with his name. And for the men inside that web, the feeling can shift over time. At first it feels like relief, then it feels like obligation, then it feels like humiliation. Because there's a difference between respect and dependence, and Roman nobles especially. Proud. Old family nobles hated dependence. They wanted to be first, not second best, not made by Caesar, not the kind of man who only matters because Caesar allowed it. So you get this strange, emotional war happening under the surface of politics. On one side, Caesar believes he's stabilizing Rome. He believes he's restoring order after civil war. He believes he's earned the right to lead, and he's not totally wrong. But on the other side, the Senate class feels like the Republic is being turned into a stage play where they're all background actors. They're still wearing the costumes of power, riddles, offices, speeches. But Caesar holds the real script, and nothing triggers elite panic faster than the feeling that your role has become decorative. Now add one more ingredient: legitimacy. Caesar's power is enormous, but it's also fragile. Not fragile because he's weak, fragile because it's personal. So much of Rome's stability is hanging on one man's choices, one man's health, one man's moods. That's not how a republic is supposed to work, and everyone knows it, which creates Caesar's biggest problem. He needs the future to make sense. He needs people to believe that Rome won't collapse the second he's gone. He needs an heir, not just for himself, though of course he wants legacy, but also because without an heir, his whole system looks like a temporary takeover, a one-man storm. And the moment Caesar dies, every old rivalry comes back alive. So Caesar is trapped between two fears. Fear number one, being forgotten. Every powerful man deep down wants the same thing: his name to last. For Caesar, legacy is not a bonus prize. It's the point. It's why he writes, why he performs, why he keeps moving, why he keeps winning. He wants Rome to remember him as the man who reshaped the world. Fear number two, being ruled. This is the Senate's fear. They don't want to become subjects. They don't want to wake up one morning and realize the republic is gone, replaced by one permanent household, with Caesar as father and everyone else as children. Because if Caesar becomes Rome's father, then freedom starts to look like childhood, and adulthood starts to look like rebellion. That's why the word son is explosive, because it hints at inheritance. An inheritance is where loyalty turns into rivalry. A son isn't just someone close to you. A son is someone who might replace you, or someone who might be used to destroy you. And in Caesar's world, there are men who fit that role in different ways. Men the public might see as his political children. One of them is the kind of man who wants to be good, the kind of man with a clean reputation, the kind of man whose involvement would make an assassination look like an act of principle, not a power grab. And that's exactly why he's so valuable. Because if you want to kill Caesar and survive afterward, you don't just need swords. You need legitimacy. You need the public to believe the murder is not murder. You need it to look like a rescue mission. And for that, you need a son to do it. So now that you understand how Rome thinks, how fatherhood means power, how sonhood can be legal and political, how adoption and patronage can create family out of strategy, we can finally ask the question that the conspirators are about to weaponize. Who gets to be Caesar's son? Who gets to inherit his world? And who decides that Rome would rather risk civil war than live under one father forever? Because next, we're going to meet the two sons standing closest to Caesar's shadow. One will help end him. The other will make sure Caesar's name still rules Rome long after the blood is cleaned off the Senate floor. If Caesar is the center of this story, then the next question is simple and dangerous. Who circles closest to him? Not the loud enemies, not the obvious rivals, but the men standing near enough to be shaped by him. Because in Rome, closeness to power is never neutral. It changes you, it upgrades you, it stains you, and sometimes it turns you into the very thing you swore you would never become. Around Caesar, there are many ambitious men, but to stand out because Rome can imagine them as his sons in two completely different ways. One is a symbol before he is a person, the kind of name that sounds like virtue even when the world gets ugly. The other is almost invisible at first, young enough that most of Rome doesn't bother to fear him, and that's exactly why he survives. Long enough to matter. First, there is Marcus Junius Brutus. Even saying the name feels like stepping into a legend, because Brutus is not just a man in the late Republic. He is a story Rome tells itself about what it wants to be. He comes from an elite family with an ancestor Romans love to quote the Brutus, who, according to tradition, helped overthrow kings and helped build the Republic. Whether every detail of that legend is perfectly true almost doesn't matter, because the belief is real. In Rome, belief is power. And Brutus walks around with a family history that functions like a crown made of expectations. Brutus grows up in a world that teaches him a specific kind of pride. Not the loud pride of conquest, but the quiet pride of being better. Better. Educated. More disciplined. More serious. More Roman. He studies philosophy. He talks about virtue. He tries to present himself as the kind of man who can't be bought. That image becomes his shield. But it also becomes his trap, because once the world starts seeing you as the honorable one, you'll stop being allowed to act like a normal human being. Every decision becomes a test. Every compromise becomes a scandal. And when people want to use you, they don't have to threaten you. They just have to challenge your identity. This is what makes Brutus so valuable to Caesar, and later so valuable to Caesar's enemies. In a city where most leaders are openly hungry for power, Brutus can be sold as something rarer. A man who wants power only to give it back. A man who can do ruthless things while still looking pure. That is a terrifying skill in politics. And it's why Brutus becomes, in elite eyes, something like a symbolic son to Caesar, not because of blood, but because of closeness, trust, and the way Caesar's favor can raise a man publicly until everyone starts treating him like part of Caesar's political household. Caesar, for his part, has a talent that feels like warmth, but works like strategy. He draws people in, he forgives them, he makes them feel seen, and then he places them where everyone else can see them too. When Caesar elevates Brutus, it sends a signal to the entire Republic. This man matters to Caesar. This man is protected. This man is inside the circle. That kind of favoritism can look like affection, and sometimes it is, but in Rome, it's never just personal. It changes the balance of power. It creates jealousies. It creates dependencies. It creates a quiet question that grows louder every time Caesar honors Brutus. Is Brutus a partner? Or is he being groomed? And here's where the psychological pressure begins to build. Because being treated like a son by Caesar is not a compliment everyone can accept. For some men, it feels like being adopted into greatness. For others, it feels like being owned. It feels like the Republic is shrinking until it fits inside Caesar's private relationships. It feels like the Senate is becoming a family dinner, where Caesar sits at the head of the table and everyone else waits to be served. Now, while Brutus is the son Rome can see, older, respected, there's another figure in Caesar's orbit who represents a different future entirely. Gaius Octavius, the young man history will later know as Augustus. At this point, he's not famous. He's not feared. In fact, he's easy to overlook, which is one of the most important advantages anyone can have in Rome. Because attention in Roman politics is not just light, it's heat. And young Octavian is still cool enough to move without burning. Octavian is connected to Caesar through family lines, but not in a way that automatically makes him powerful. He's young, he's not the main character yet, and he doesn't have Brutus's ready-made reputation. He doesn't walk into rooms with a legend attached to his name. He walks into rooms and people measure him quietly, and some of them dismiss him. That dismissal is a gift. It gives him time to watch, time to learn who smiles and who lies, time to understand that Rome is not run by ideals. It's run by leverage, Octavian's. Position is strange because he is close to the greatest man in Rome without fully belonging to the world that man dominates. He's on the edge of the inner circle, and edges are where you see the truth. The center of power is full of flattery and performance, but the edge is where you notice who is nervous, who is bitter, who is waiting for Caesar to fall. Octavian learns early that affection in politics can be real and still be used like a weapon. He learns that a favor is never just a favor. It's a claim, a hook in your skin that can be pulled later. The two men could not feel more different. Brutus is heavy with history. Octavian is light with possibility. Brutus wants to be judged as good. Octavian wants to be effective. Brutus believes in the Republic like it's a sacred inheritance. Octavian studies the Republic like it's a machine that's already breaking. And Caesar, whether he realizes it or not, is positioned between them like a father figure in a family that's starting to split. This is where the story gets tense. Because Caesar's affection, his attention, his praise, his trust doesn't just create loyalty, it creates competition. When a powerful man shows love publicly, everyone else starts asking what that love means. Who is being chosen? Who is being positioned for the future? Who is being protected from consequences? In Rome, affection becomes a signal, and signals become weapons. To Caesar's supporters, men like Brutus are proof that Caesar is generous and stable. Look, they say, he even lifts up men from the old Republic, even men with famous family names. He is not a tyrant. He is a reconciler. But to Caesar's enemies, that same relationship can be framed in a darker way. They can say Brutus has been absorbed, that the great Republican name has been turned into Caesar's decoration, that the man who should represent liberty is now standing too close to the throne. And that framing is powerful because it attacks Brutus where he is most vulnerable, his self-image. If Brutus is the man of virtue, then what happens when Rome starts whispering that he's Caesar's creature? What happens when people imply he's been adopted into Caesar's rule, not as an equal, but as a prop? In a world obsessed with honor, that kind of whisper doesn't just hurt feelings. It changes choices. It forces a man to prove something. Meanwhile, Octavian hears the whispers too, but he absorbs them differently. He doesn't build his identity around being praised as virtuous. He builds it around staying alive and becoming undeniable, where Brutus feels the weight of what Rome expects him to be. Octavian feels the clarity of what Rome rewards. And the reward, in the end, is always the same. Power that can protect you when the crowd turns. So here's the danger that begins to form around Caesar. The danger he doesn't fully control. By lifting people up, he creates men who are big enough to become symbols. By forgiving enemies, he keeps them close enough to strike. By treating certain figures like family, like political sons, he turns Rome's obsession with lineage into a countdown towards succession. Because once Rome starts thinking in terms of sons, it starts thinking in terms of inheritance. And once inheritance enters the room, love becomes suspicious. Every kindness looks strategic. Every promotion looks like a plan. Every close relationship becomes a potential betrayal. And somewhere inside that tension is the reason the assassination works at all. The conspirators don't just need knives. They need a man whose image can carry the moral weight of murder. They need someone the public won't instantly hate. They need a face that makes people hesitate before calling it what it is. And the moment they look at Brutus, they realize they've found the perfect weapon. Because Caesar's affection has done something strange. It has made Brutus look important enough to matter, close enough to trust, and pure enough to sell to the public. Caesar, by raising him, has unknowingly increased his value to the people who want Caesar dead. So now the story tightens. Caesar is at the center, powerful but exposed. Brutus is the symbol everyone wants to claim. Octavian is the quiet outsider learning how Rome really works. And Rome itself is holding its breath, asking the question it always asks when one man grows too big. Who will take his place? Next, we're going to go inside Brutus's mind, because before the knives come out, a different kind of battle happens first. The battle isn't in the streets. It isn't in the Senate. It's inside one man's identity, where honor can be twisted into a reason to kill, and where the word son can turn from a bond into a motive. Brutus is one of those historical figures people want to simplify. Some want him to be a pure hero, the man who saved the Republic. Others want him to be a pure traitor, the man who stabbed his friend in the back. Rome didn't experience him that cleanly, and neither did he. The more you look at Brutus, the more you realize he isn't built like a villain or a saint. He's built like a pressure cooker. And Rome is turning up the heat. At the center of Brutus's life is a problem that sounds almost modern. He wants to be a good person in a world that doesn't reward goodness. He reads philosophy and talks about virtue, self-control, and duty. He wants to believe there's a right way to live. But he also lives in Roman politics, which is a competitive sport played for keeps. In that arena, being right doesn't matter nearly as much as being stronger. And Brutus feels that conflict every time he opens his mouth in public. This is where his identity crisis begins. Is he a philosopher who happens to be a public servant? Or is he a politician using philosophy as a costume? In Rome, people don't just do things, they perform them. They perform loyalty, grief, patriotism, honor. Brutus wants to perform less and mean more. But the more power he touches, the more he learns that Rome punishes men who refuse to play the game. And there is another weight on him that is heavier than personal ambition. His name, Brutus, doesn't just carry a family name. He carries a national myth. Romans tell themselves that a Brutus once helped remove kings and replace them with a republic. That story is like a ghost that follows him into every room. It sits beside him when he speaks. It stands behind him when he vaults. It whispers to him when he tries to sleep. The cruelest part is that the ghost doesn't offer comfort. It offers a standard he can never truly meet. Imagine being told your whole life that greatness is your inheritance, that your bloodline is tied to freedom itself, and that one day history may call on you to prove it. That's not inspiration, that's a trap. Because in Rome, legacy isn't just pride. It's a demand. So Brutus grows up, surrounded by expectations that don't sound like questions. They sound like instructions. Be worthy, be strong, be pure. Be the kind of man who would do the hard thing for the Republic, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Because pain, in Roman elite culture, often gets mistaken for virtue. Now put that man in the path of Julius Caesar. Caesar is everything. Brutus is not. Caesar is not trying to be seen as morally perfect. Caesar is trying to win. He is charismatic, fearless in public, and strangely warm in private when he wants to be. He understands people. He understands vanity. He understands fear. And most importantly, he understands that in politics, emotions are often more reliable. Then Caesar also has a skill that makes him dangerous. He knows how to make you feel chosen. When Caesar speaks to you like you matter, it lands like sunlight. It makes men who have lived in competition their whole lives feel suddenly safe, suddenly special, suddenly seen. That doesn't just build loyalty, it builds attachment. And attachment can be stronger than fear because fear makes you want to escape. Attachment makes you want to stay. That's why Caesar's forgiveness is not just mercy. It's a kind of psychological capture. After the Civil War, Caesar has every reason to destroy his enemies. Many Roman strongmen would have, but Caesar often chooses the move that feels more impressive. He spares them. He allows them back into public life. He gives them honors. He lets them keep their dignity, at least on the surface, to the public that looks noble. To the men he spares, it creates a complicated emotional knot. Gratitude mixes with resentment. Relief mixes with shame. Because if Caesar can kill you, but doesn't, then your life becomes his gift. And gifts from powerful men are never free. 4. Brutus. Caesar's mercy becomes a personal earthquake. Brutus ends up on the wrong side of Caesar's rise, tied to the old Republican elite and its shifting alliances. But Caesar forgives him. Caesar brings him close. Caesar treats him with a kind of respect that makes other senators notice. From the outside, it can look like affection. It can look like a fatherly bond. It can even look like Caesar believes Brutus is the future of Rome, a respectable bridge between Caesar's new order and the old republic. But inside Brutus, that closeness creates a slow, painful transformation. Because once you've been forgiven by a man like Caesar, you can't pretend you're fully independent anymore. People start to read you differently. They look at your career and see Caesar's fingerprints. They look at your success and wonder what you traded for it. They don't ask it out loud. They don't have to. The implication is enough. And Brutus, who cares deeply about honor, feels the implication like a bruise. At first, gratitude is real. How could it not be? Caesar has the power to ruin him, and instead he protects him. Caesar gives him a place. In the new Rome, Caesar gives him the ability to keep living. And in Roman politics, survival is its own kind of privilege. But gratitude has an expiration date when it's mixed with pride, because gratitude can start to feel like dependence. And dependence can start to feel like humiliation. This is the emotional pivot that turns a relationship into a threat. Brutus begins to realize that Caesar's mercy doesn't just save him, it also cages him. Think about it in simple human terms. If one person can destroy you, but chooses not to, you might feel grateful. But over time, you might also feel small. You might start to wonder if the world sees you as a person, or as someone's possession. And once that thought takes root, it spreads. In Brutus's case, it spreads into an even darker question. If Caesar is the man who decides who lives and who rises, then what is the Senate? What is the Republic? What is law? If Caesar can rewrite everyone's futures with a single decision, then Caesar is not just a leader, he's a judge, a king in everything but name. And Brutus's name, his ancestry, his whole moral identity, reacts to that possibility like an immune system reacts to an infection. It tries to reject it, but rejecting Caesar is not easy, because Caesar is not only powerful, he is also personally kind in a way that makes betrayal feel like a sin. This is another reason Caesar is so hard to deal with. Fear-based rulers create enemies who feel justified, but charm-based rulers create enemies who feel guilty. Caesar doesn't just dominate Brutus politically, he confuses him emotionally. Brutus can't simply say, "I hate this man." That would be easier. Instead, he has to admit something more uncomfortable. I respect this man. Maybe even I like him. Maybe even I owe him. And the moment you owe Caesar, Caesar has you. At least that's what Caesar thinks. But there is a second force acting on Brutus, and it's just as strong as Caesar's charm. Rome's judgment. The whispers, the looks, the quiet comparisons, the way people measure your choices against your family myth. Brutus hears it in the Senate and outside it. He hears it in the way certain men praise him a little too loudly for virtue, like they're trying to push him into a corner. He hears it in the way others treat him like Caesar's favorite, like Caesar's political son, like a man who has been adopted into Caesar's personal empire. And once Brutus starts seeing himself through those eyes, he becomes vulnerable too. A particular kind of manipulation. Moral blackmail. Moral blackmail doesn't sound like a threat. It sounds like a compliment. You're the only one who can do this. You're the only one Rome will believe. You're the only one pure enough to save us. It's the kind of pressure that feels like destiny. And Brutus, trapped between his ideals and his survival, starts to drift toward a dangerous conclusion. Maybe the Republic can't be saved by normal politics anymore. Maybe laws won't work. Maybe speeches won't work. Maybe voting won't work. Maybe the only way to stop Caesar from becoming Rome's permanent father is to remove him. That thought doesn't arrive as a clear decision. It arrives like a stain spreading across fabric. Slow, quiet, hard to admit. Because the moment Brutus admits that violence might be necessary, he also admits that his image of himself, the good man, the virtuous man, might be incompatible with reality. And that is exactly the psychological doorway conspirators need. They don't need to convince Brutus to be evil. They need to convince him that murder can be moral. That's the key. That's the trap. Because once you accept that, you can do anything and still feel clean. Meanwhile, Caesar keeps moving through Rome like a man who believes his own success proves his right to lead. He accepts honors. He centralizes decisions. He acts less like one senator among many and more like the state itself. Sometimes he does it deliberately. Sometimes it's just momentum. Either way, it feeds the fear that he's building a monarchy with republican decorations. And the more Caesar acts like Rome's father, the more Brutus feels like he's being forced into the role of Rome's son. Not Caesar's son, emotionally, necessarily, but Caesar's son politically, someone meant to validate Caesar's rule by standing near it. And Brutus, with his family legend and his public reputation, cannot tolerate the idea of being used that way. So the emotional pivot completes itself. Gratitude becomes resentment. Respect becomes alarm. A personal debt starts to feel like public shame. And shame, in the Roman elite mind, is not a private feeling. It's an emergency. It's a threat to identity. A threat to legacy. That's why Brutus doesn't move like a simple opportunist. He moves like a man trying to rescue his own reflection from the mirror. And now the story is ready for the moment where the private crisis becomes public action. Because once Brutus starts believing that Caesar is turning Rome into a household with one father at the top, the next step becomes almost inevitable. Someone will come to him. Someone will say the words he can't say to himself. Someone will offer him a way to be Brutus in the legendary sense, not just the living sense. And when that happens, Brutus will have to choose between the man who spared him and the myth that raised him. Next, we're going to watch how Caesar's greatest weapon, his mercy, creates the perfect conditions for a conspiracy. Because the plot against Caesar doesn't begin with hatred. It begins with men who feel trapped. Men who feel small. And one man who is terrified of what history will call him if he does nothing. After a civil war, most winners don't leave many losers standing. That's the normal pattern, not just in Rome, but in human history. The safest enemy is the enemy who can't come back. Caesar knows that rule. Everyone in Rome knows that rule. Which is why Caesar's next move shocks people more than any battle he ever won. He chooses mercy. Not once. Not as a PR stunt. Over and over again. Caesar's clemency becomes a signature, almost a brand. Former enemies are spared. Men who fought against him are allowed to return. Some are even given positions, honors, and public respect. On the surface, it looks like Caesar is trying to heal Rome. Like he wants the civil war to be the last one. Like he's building a future where Romans can live together again. And part of that is true. Caesar is not stupid. He understands that a city full of dead aristocrats is a city that can't govern itself. He also understands that mercy makes him look bigger than his rivals. Anyone can be cruel. It takes confidence to forgive, because forgiveness is a message. It says, I am so secure, I don't need revenge. But mercy has a darker side. Especially in a society obsessed with honor. Because mercy doesn't just spare people. It rearranges the hierarchy. When Caesar forgives you, he doesn't just let you live. He places you under him. Publicly, permanently. Everyone can see that you exist because he allowed it. That creates a moral debt that doesn't show up on any ledger, but it follows you everywhere. And moral debts are some of the most powerful chains in politics, because they don't just bind your actions, they bind your identity. If you were Caesar's enemy yesterday and he spares you today, then tomorrow you have a problem. You can't easily oppose him again without looking ungrateful. You can't criticize him without people saying, after what he did for you. You can't act like an equal because the whole city watched you get rescued. So Caesar's mercy becomes a strategy. It produces loyalty in some men, but in others, it produces something much more volatile. Resentment mixed with shame. That's the blind spot. Caesar assumes mercy will make his opponents softer. He assumes gratitude will keep them close. He assumes that by sparing men, he turns them into supporters. Sometimes he does, but sometimes he turns them into prisoners who are allowed to walk around. And the most dangerous prisoner is the one who still has a title, still has influence, still has friends, and still has pride. This is the atmosphere Caesar creates in Rome after the war. Not a clean peace, but a tense new order where everyone is watching Caesar's moods, reading his signals, interpreting his silence. The Republic still exists on paper, but more and more it feels like the Republic is happening in one man's shadow. Caesar doesn't sit on a throne, but Rome starts to feel like a court. And courts have a different kind of gravity than republics. In a republic, you compete with laws and elections. In a court, you compete for access. You compete for the leader's attention, his time, his favor. The room matters more than the rulebook. Suddenly, a senator's biggest skill isn't persuading the Senate. It's staying close enough to Caesar to matter. That shift is subtle, but it's deadly. Because when politics becomes access, everyone becomes a client. Everyone becomes dependent. Even the proudest men start acting like petitioners in the hallway, waiting for Caesar's approval like it's a verdict. That's why so many senators start to feel smaller, even when they're technically still powerful. Their offices still exist, but the meaning of those offices is draining away. And you can see it in the way Rome behaves. People start treating Caesar's presence as the final word. Caesar's opinions become policy before votes happen. Caesar's friends become important, and Caesar's enemies become cautious. In that environment, the men closest to Caesar become symbols. They aren't just individuals anymore. They become proof of Caesar's control, proof of who is inside and who is outside. And this is where Brutus becomes central to Caesar's story in a way. Caesar may not fully understand. Caesar elevates Brutus in public. He gives him honors and trust. He allows him access. He treats him with respect that other senators notice. Caesar does not have to say, "This man is like a son to me," for Rome to start thinking it. In Rome, people don't wait for you to label something. They label it for you based on behavior, and then the label becomes reality. When Caesar lifts Brutus up, it creates a powerful image. The most famous Roman in the world is embracing a man associated with old republican virtue. It looks like reconciliation. It looks like Caesar is not destroying the Republic, but integrating it. It looks like Caesar is so reasonable that even Brutus stands with him. That image is useful to Caesar. It makes his rule look less like a takeover, and more like a transition. It calms the crowd. It pressures other senators to fall in line, because if even Brutus can work with Caesar, what excuse do they have? But that same image is also a gift to Caesar's enemies, because once Brutus becomes publicly close to Caesar, Brutus becomes usable. His reputation becomes a tool. His virtue becomes a costume someone else can borrow if the Senate ever decides Caesar has gone too far. They don't want the face of the resistance to be a bitter rival or a known extremist. They want it to be a man the public trusts. They want it to be someone who looks like he's doing this for Rome, not for himself. They want a son to do it. Not in blood, necessarily, but in symbolism. The kind of son who makes an act of violence look like an act of duty. And Caesar, by publicly fathering Brutus, by elevating him in the eyes of Rome, makes Brutus that man. This is the uncomfortable truth about Caesar's world. Affection is never just affection. It changes people's positions. It changes what they represent. Caesar thinks he's building loyalty through honors and closeness. But in a court-like atmosphere, honors and closeness do something else too. They make people compete. They make people resent. They make proud men feel like they're being managed. Because the more Caesar hands out favors, the more it feels like Rome is being run like a private household. Like Caesar is the paterfamilias of the entire state, the father whose word is final, the father whose mercy keeps everyone alive, the father whose approval determines which careers rise and which careers disappear. That's where the monarchy, fear grows. It's not just that Caesar has power. Rome has seen powerful men before. It's that Caesar's power is starting to feel normal, permanent, inherited. And that's when senators begin to panic in a very specific way. They don't just fear Caesar in the present. They fear Caesar's future. They fear what comes after him. They fear a line of Caesars, a dynasty, a Rome where father and son become the language of government. That fear doesn't always show itself as rage. Sometimes it shows itself as jokes, whispers, bitter comments, little acts of resistance. But underneath it is a simple thought. If Caesar becomes a monarch in everything but name, the Republic is already dead. And the longer they wait, the harder it becomes to bring it back. Here's the tragic irony. Caesar's mercy, meant to stabilize Rome, also keeps dangerous men alive and close. His ego, the confidence that he can manage everyone, makes him underestimate how humiliation can rot a relationship. And his public closeness to respected figures like Brutus turns those figures into political weapons, symbols that can be aimed at him. Because the more Caesar acts like the father of Rome, the more certain sons begin to feel like they only have two options: accept the household and become obedient, or rebel, and rebellion, in this world, doesn't look like a protest sign. It looks like a dagger hidden in a fold of cloth. That is Caesar's fatal blind spot. He believes he can reshape Rome with charm, mercy, and control. He believes he can turn enemies into supporters by forgiving them. He believes that by lifting men up, he owns their future. But human pride doesn't always respond to generosity the way power expects it to. Sometimes, generosity feels like a spotlight that shows the whole city who you belong to. And if you're a man like Brutus raised on the myth that your family helped destroy kings belonging to Caesar, can start to feel like the one thing you cannot survive next. We're going to watch the conspiracy form, and you'll see how it actually works. Not as a sudden decision, but as a social process. A group of men slowly convincing themselves that murder is not only acceptable, but necessary. And at the center of that process will be one terrifying realization: to kill Caesar and live afterward. They need more than courage. They need a clean name. They need a symbol. They need someone Rome will believe. They need Caesar's son. The men who want Caesar dead have a problem that no knife can solve. They don't just need Caesar to die. They need Rome to agree with them afterward. Because in a city like Rome, killing a leader doesn't automatically make you a hero. It can just as easily make you a criminal, a traitor, or the trigger for another civil war. If the crowds turn on you, if the soldiers turn on you, if the wrong allies decide you've gone too far, you won't get a second chance. You'll get hunted. So the conspirators aren't thinking like assassins. They're thinking like storytellers. They're thinking about optics, legitimacy, and what people will believe when the blood is still wet on the Senate floor. And that's where their dilemma becomes almost impossible. Caesar is popular with the masses. He has veterans who owe him everything. He has allies who want the stability he represents. Even many senators, privately nervous about his power, are publicly cautious because they don't want to be the first to take the risk of opposing him. So, if you're going to kill Caesar, you need a moral cover so strong it can survive the shock. You need the public to see the murder not as ambition, but as duty, not as revenge, but as rescue, not as treason, but as liberty. And that means the identity of the killer matters nearly as much as the act itself. A random senator with a grudge is not enough. A hardened fighter is not enough. In fact, the most capable assassin could be the worst choice. Because the more violent his reputation, the easier it is for Rome to dismiss the assassination as simple power hunger. What the conspirators need is someone Rome trusts. Someone whose name makes people hesitate before they condemn him. Someone whose involvement turns an ugly act into a noble narrative. That is why, sooner or later, the conspiracy turns its eyes toward Brutus. Not because Brutus is the strongest man in the room, not because he's the most ruthless, not because he's the best at hiding a dagger, but because Brutus is the best symbol. In Rome, symbols are not decoration, they are political weapons. And Brutus is a symbol shaped like a solution. He has the right ancestry, the right reputation, the right public image. The story of Brutus the Liberator is already half written in Rome's collective imagination. All the conspirators have to do is push him into the role. And this is where their manipulation becomes almost elegant. They don't approach Brutus by saying, "We want to murder Caesar." They approach him by asking, "Do you love the Republic?" They don't ask, "Do you want power?" They ask, "Do you want Rome to be free?" They don't say, "Join our plot." They say, "History is calling you." Because the easiest way to control a man like Brutus is not by threatening him. It's by flattering his identity. They appeal to liberty first, because liberty is a word that sounds clean even when it leads to blood. They talk about the Republic like it's a fragile living thing that Caesar is suffocating. They describe Caesar's growing honors and central control as proof that monarchy is already here, just wearing a toga instead of a crown. Then they move to ancestry, because ancestry is Brutus's soft spot. They remind him who he comes from. They remind him what his name is supposed to mean. They place him in a line of heroes and quietly suggest that if he does nothing, he will be the weak link that breaks the chain. And then, when liberty and ancestry have opened the door, they bring in the sharpest tool of all. Shame. Shame is powerful because it doesn't just accuse you of doing something wrong. It accuses you of being the wrong kind of person. For Brutus, shame doesn't look like embarrassment. It looks like moral failure. It looks like betrayal of his own legacy. So they lean in and ask the questions that sting. If Caesar becomes king, where will that leave you? Do you want to be remembered as the man who stood beside the tyrant? Do you want to be Caesar's decoration? They don't need to insult Brutus directly. They just need to make him imagine how Rome might judge him. Once that image gets into his mind, it starts doing the work for them. Because Brutus doesn't just fear Caesar's power. He fears the story Rome will tell about him. And then comes destiny. This is the final stage of recruitment. Destiny is when persuasion becomes religion. When men stop saying, "We want this," and start saying, "This must happen." They tell Brutus that only he can do it, that Rome will accept the assassination only if a man like Brutus is involved, that without him they will fail, or worse, they will succeed and be seen as criminals. They position him not as a participant, but as the conscience of the entire operation. It is a brilliant trap, because it makes refusal feel selfish. If Brutus says no, he's not just declining a risky plan. He's abandoning Rome. He's abandoning his ancestors. He's abandoning his own reputation. And if the conspiracy goes forward without him and collapses into chaos, Brutus will feel responsible anyway. So the conspirators keep tightening the circle until Brutus is standing in a room with men who are speaking softly and looking at him like he's already chosen. Now the story shifts from ideas to logistics. And this is where tension starts to rise, like a thriller. Because conspiracies don't feel dramatic from the inside. They feel paranoid. They feel like constantly checking the door. They feel like lowering your voice even when there's no one there. They feel like listening for footsteps in the hallway and wondering if your friend is about to become your executioner. These men meet in small groups. They choose places where sound gets swallowed by stone and distance. They speak in partial sentences, using careful words. In Rome, a casual comment can destroy you. A rumor can become an arrest. A servant can become a witness. And Caesar's power means that even the walls feel loyal to him. Every meeting carries the same fear. What if we've already been exposed? Because Caesar is not just a politician. He has eyes everywhere. He has allies everywhere. And he has the kind of authority that makes people eager to report on you just to prove their loyalty. So, the conspirators take precautions. They test each. Other they watch for hesitation. They try to measure who is committed and who is just curious. Some want to swear oaths. Some argue that oaths are dangerous because oaths create proof. Some men push for a broader list of targets, believing that Caesar's allies should die too. Others argue that killing too many will turn Rome against them instantly, even inside. The conspiracy, there is no single motive. That's another reason this plot is unstable from the start. For Brutus, the story is moral. He tells himself he's preventing tyranny. He tells himself he's saving the Republic. He tells himself that Caesar's death is a tragic necessity, like cutting out an infection before it spreads. But not everyone in that room is driven by ideals. Some are driven by fear. Because Caesar's rise has made their future uncertain. Some are driven by envy, because Caesar's success has made them feel small. Some are driven by revenge, because Caesar defeated them, embarrassed them, or forgave them in a way that felt like a public slap. And that creates the key tension inside. The plot. Brutus needs this to stay clean, because he needs to believe in it. He needs to believe he's doing something honorable. But other men are not interested in clean. They're interested in final. This difference matters, because it shapes the plan. Brutus argues for restraint. He argues that they should kill Caesar. And only Caesar, because the moment the plot looks like a purge, it loses its moral legitimacy. He wants the assassination to look like a single surgical act done for the Republic, not a bloodbath done for power. Other conspirators want more. They want to kill Caesar's allies. They want to remove anyone who might retaliate. They want to finish the job completely, not partly. And every time Brutus insists on limits, he's revealing something important. He is not built for the world. He's entering. He wants to control violence with philosophy. He wants to keep a murder morally pure. But murder is not a clean instrument. Once you pick it up, it stains everything it touches. As the plan forms, the conspirators are also fighting time. They need the right moment. Caesar moves with protection. Caesar has loyal supporters. Caesar has the authority to crush suspicion before it becomes danger. They need an environment where weapons can be brought close without raising alarms, and where Caesar will be surrounded by people he trusts. That is why the Senate becomes the perfect location. Because in the Senate, closeness is normal. In the Senate, men approach Caesar every day to ask favors and plead cases. In the Senate, a circle around Caesar doesn't look like a threat. It looks like politics. And that's the final terrifying piece. The best place to kill Caesar is the place designed for debate and law. The heart of the Republic becomes the stage for an execution. As the date draws closer, the pressure inside, the conspiracy intensifies. Men become jumpy. Casual conversations feel dangerous. Friendly greetings feel like tests. Every messenger could be a spy. Every delay could be fate saving Caesar, or fate trapping them. And Brutus, caught in the middle, starts living in a mental split screen. In one panel, he sees himself as Rome's savior, acting with painful virtue. In the other panel, he sees the reality. He is about to join a group of men in murdering a political leader in public. That contradiction doesn't paralyze him, it hardens him. Because once a man like Brutus commits to a story where violence equals virtue, he becomes capable of things he never imagined. Not because he stops caring about morality, but because he believes he has turned morality into a weapon. And that is why the conspirators needed him. Not to stab Caesar better, but to make the stabbing mean something. The plan is now in motion. The meetings have been held. The decision has been made. The Senate will become a trap disguised as routine. And the most respected, honorable man in Rome is walking toward a moment that will define him forever. Next comes the day itself. And this is where all the private arguments and whispered promises slam into public reality. Because no matter how carefully they planned it, the moment Caesar steps into that room, control becomes an illusion. People panic. Men improvise. The story can slip out of their hands in seconds. And the biggest question hanging over everything is the one Rome will be asking the instant the first blade lands, when Caesar looks up and recognizes who is standing over him. What happens to a man's faith and loyalty? Because in that moment, politics won't feel like politics anymore. It will feel like family turning violent. Caesar's last mourning doesn't begin like the final mourning of a man who knows he's about to die. It begins like any other day for someone who has been winning for so long that danger starts to feel like a rumor people tell to entertain themselves. Rome is already awake. Messengers move through narrow streets. senators rehearse their faces. Somewhere, men who have agreed to murder the most powerful person in the Republic are trying to eat breakfast with steady hands, and Caesar, at the center of all of it, does what powerful men often do when the world feels uncertain. He performs calm. The warnings come anyway. Some are specific, some are vague, some are the kind of warnings that only become famous because of what happens later. People close to him are uneasy. Friends advise him to be careful. The city's political temperature has been rising, and Caesar isn't blind to it. He can feel the tension in how people speak around him, in how certain men smile a little too stiffly, in how conversations stop when he enters a room. But Caesar has made a career out of refusing to look afraid. Fear, for him, is a luxury he can't afford. If he shows hesitation, he invites challenge. If he stays home, it looks like weakness. And in Rome, weakness is an invitation written in public ink. So he chooses to go, and the choice is more than stubbornness. It's identity. Caesar is the kind of man who believes that showing up is a form of control. He believes the public sees him as Rome's stabilizer, the man who makes decisions when others only argue. If he starts acting like a target, he admits he can be hunted. If he starts acting like a normal politician, he gives the Senate its old power back. Caesar doesn't want to return to that world. He wants to push forward into the one he is building. That morning, the city itself feels like it's holding its breath. The streets are familiar, but the mood is not. Rome has seen political violence before, but this feels different because Caesar is not a politician. He is the political weather. When Caesar moves, the whole republic shifts. And there is a detail worth remembering as he heads toward the Senate. Caesar is walking toward a place where violence is not supposed to happen. The Senate is not a battlefield. It's supposed to be words, votes, and rules. That's why this assassination hits like a blasphemy. The act itself doesn't just kill a man. It desecrates the idea of the Republic inside the Senate House. The trap is already waiting. The conspirators aren't standing in a dramatic formation. They're standing like senators. They're doing what they always do, talking, waiting, pretending to be normal. Their weapons are hidden because in Rome you don't walk into the Senate waving steel. The whole point of the plan is that the Senate is intimate, close quarters, bodies packed in, movement that can be explained as routine. The closeness is what makes Caesar vulnerable. In an open space, Caesar's guards would have room to react. In a street, a crowd might get in the way. But here, in this tight chamber, men can press in from all sides. A hand can disappear under cloth. A blade can appear for a second and vanish again. Confusion can be created instantly, and confusion is the conspirator's best ally. Caesar enters, and the room shifts around him like metal filings around a magnet. Men stand, heads turn, faces arrange themselves into respect. Caesar moves toward his seat with that familiar confidence, the confidence of someone who expects the world to adjust. He is not careless, exactly. He is simply used to being obeyed, and then it begins the way so many betrayals begin, not with an attack, but with a request. A senator approaches Caesar as if he's there for business, as if he's there to petition, to plead, to ask for something small. Others move closer too, forming a circle that looks ordinary to anyone who has watched Roman politics work. Caesar is constantly surrounded by men asking favors. This is not strange. This is routine. That's why the trap is so effective. For a moment, Caesar is irritated. He's being crowded. He's being interrupted. He's being pressured. He tries to brush it off the way he always does, with authority and impatience, like a man used to controlling the room with a look. But the circle tightens, and in that tightening, the air changes. The first strike is not clean. It's not theatrical. It's sudden and awkward, the way real violence often is when it breaks out in a place built for conversation. At first, Caesar doesn't understand what's happening, because the mind resists the truth when the truth is too absurd. This is the Senate. These are senators. These are not street killers. This is politics. But then the shock drops into place. This isn't politics. This is an execution. The moment that follows is less like a duel and more like a swarm. Caesar tries to rise. People press in. The noise changes from murmurs to gasps to the hard, panicked sounds of bodies colliding. The men striking him are so close that there's no space for drama, only urgency. Each attacker wants to be part of it, because in a plot like this, participation is protection. If Caesar survives, the men who hesitated will be the easiest to punish. If Caesar dies, the men who struck become bound together by shared guilt. This is what conspiracies do to people. They turn fear into momentum. Caesar's world narrows to faces and hands. And this is where the emotional core of the assassination lives, not in the gore, not in the number of blades, in recognition. Because Caesar begins to identify the men around him. He sees people he has worked with, men he has forgiven, men he has promoted, men who have smiled at him in public and benefited from his stability. He is not being killed by strangers. He is being killed by his own political household. It's one thing to die in war. In war, you expect your enemy to hate you. You expect violence. You expect the battlefield to be the place where loyalty ends. But in this room, the betrayal is intimate. The attackers are not far away. They are in arm's reach. They are close enough to look him in the eyes. And then comes the moment history can't stop circling. Caesar and Brutus. Brutus is not just another senator in that crowd. Brutus is the man whose name carries republic like a brand. Brutus is the man Caesar treated with special respect, the man Caesar elevated publicly, the man who looked to many like proof that Caesar could reconcile the old Rome with the new one. This is why people describe this moment in family language. Because Brutus is the one whose presence turns the assassination from a political killing into something that feels like patricide, like a son turning on a father figure. Whether Caesar literally thought of him as a son is less important than what the relationship represented to Rome. Caesar's closeness to Brutus was public. It was symbolic. It was loaded, and now that symbol is holding a blade. Inside Brutus, this is the moment where everything he has been telling himself becomes real. There is no more philosophy, no more abstract talk about liberty, no more speeches about duty. There is only a man in front of him, a man who once spared him, who once trusted him, who may have believed Brutus could be part of Rome's future. Brutus has to choose between two identities. One identity is personal, the man who owes Caesar, the man who received mercy, the man who understands Caesar's charisma up close. The other identity is mythic. The Brutus who is supposed to defend the Republic. The Brutus whose ancestor expelled kings. The Brutus who cannot be seen as Caesar's political child. In that split second, Brutus chooses the story he can live with. He chooses Rome, or at least, he chooses the version of Rome that exists inside his mind. Because to Brutus, this isn't murder, it's surgery. It's a terrible act done for a higher cause. He is trying to make himself believe that the blade in his hand is not personal, even though everything about this scene screams that it is. And Caesar, seeing him there, understands something too late. Not just that he is surrounded, but that the loyalty he thought he had purchased with mercy and honors can be turned against him. That the men he thought he had absorbed into his orbit have become the very instruments of his fall. This is what makes the assassination feel like a family. Betrayal. Caesar did not misread one enemy. He misread human pride. He assumed gratitude would outweigh humiliation. He assumed his fathering of Rome would produce obedient heirs, not men desperate to prove they are not owned. The killing ends quickly and slowly at the same time. Quickly in the sense that once the first strike lands, there is no real path back. Slowly in the sense that, in a tight space, crowded with men, every second feels stretched. Every movement is blocked by another body. Every sound is amplified. Every breath is loud. In those moments, Caesar isn't a legend. He's simply a man realizing that he cannot talk his way out of this, cannot command his way out of this, cannot charm his way out of this. When it's over, the silence doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like shock. And the conspirators, standing there with their blood-stained hands and racing hearts, truly believe that Rome is about to thank them. They think this is the moment the Republic snaps back into place. They think senators will stand and cheer. They think the city will breathe again. They think they have cut out the problem and saved the patient. But outside the Centaurs, the reaction is nothing like applause. It's panic. Word spreads the way it always spreads in a city packed tight with people, fast, distorted, and emotional. Caesar is dead. Caesar has been murdered. The Senate has turned into a slaughterhouse. People don't stop to ask if it was justified. They ask a more basic question first. What happens to us now? Because ordinary Romans don't experience political violence as philosophy. They experience it as danger. When the top collapses, the bottom gets crushed. Shops close. Crowds form and then scatter. Families pull each other indoors. Allies of Caesar worry they are next. Enemies of Caesar worry they miscalculated. Men who were not part of the plots suddenly have to pick a side, because in Rome, neutrality is short-lived. And the conspirators realize something terrifying. Killing Caesar was the easy part. Controlling what Caesar's death means is harder. They wanted to be seen as liberators. But Rome is not reacting like a nation that has been liberated. Rome is reacting like a nation that has been attacked. The Republic, instead of being restored, feels more fragile than ever, because now there is a vacuum where Caesar used to be. And a vacuum in Roman politics doesn't stay empty. It gets filled by the next ambitious man with the fastest plan. This is the shock that closes around them. They have removed Caesar, but they have not removed Caesar's shadow. In fact, they may have made it bigger, because now Caesar isn't just a living leader who can make mistakes and disappoint people. Now Caesar can become a symbol, a martyr, a legend that other men can weaponize. And as the city trembles, as the conspirators look for the applause they assumed would come, a new reality starts forming in the background. A struggle over Caesar's legacy. A struggle over who gets to claim his name. A struggle over who gets to punish the killers and who gets to inherit the future. The Ides of March was supposed to be an ending. Instead, it becomes the opening scene of something far worse. And next, you're going to see why the deadliest son in Caesar's story might not be the one who stood over him in the Senate, but the one who steps into the chaos afterward quiet, young, and ready to turn grief into power. The conspirators walk out of the Senate expecting history to clap for them. They expect the city to breathe out, to smile, to call them saviors. They expect the Republic to snap back into place like a stretched rope released. In their minds, Caesar was the problem. Remove him, and Rome returns to normal. But Rome doesn't. Return to normal, Rome panics. Because two regular people, this isn't a philosophy lesson about tyranny. It's instability. It's the kind of instability that gets your store looted, your family caught in street violence, your savings wiped out, your future decided by whichever armed group shows up first. The average Roman does not wake up thinking about constitutional purity. The average Roman wakes up thinking, will there be bread? Will there be order? Will my kids be safe? And Julius Caesar, whatever else he was, represented order. So when he's killed in the very building that is supposed to represent law, the message is not freedom. The message is anything can happen now. The city becomes a nervous animal. People gather, then scatter. Rumors multiply. Every rumor grows teeth. Some say the conspirators will be hunted. Some say Caesar's loyalists will slaughter senators. Some say civil war is guaranteed. Men begin to arm themselves, not because they want war, but because they're terrified of being defenseless if war arrives anyway. And the conspirators suddenly realize the most humiliating truth of their plan. They have removed the king in everything but name, but they have not replaced him with anything that feels safe. They have no clean transition, no unified leadership, no convincing message that reaches the people. They have a moral argument that makes sense to educated elites, and a city full of frightened citizens who don't trust elites right now. That gap is where Rome begins to slip away from them. Inside the Senate, their act was coordinated. Outside the Senate, they are improvising. They try to speak. They try to explain. They try to present the assassination as a necessary sacrifice. They lean on the language, they erased liberty, republic, the end of tyranny. But the streets don't respond like a classroom. The streets respond like a crowd. And crowds don't run on logic. Crowds run on emotion, memory, fear, and momentum. This is where Mark Antony becomes dangerous. Antony is not the philosophical type. He's not trying to win a debate about political theory. Antony understands something simpler and more powerful. Whoever controls the story controls the city. He doesn't rush in swinging a sword. He doesn't immediately declare open war. He does something far smarter. He performs grief, but his grief isn't private, it's public. It's staged where people can see it, feel it, join it. He turns Caesar's death into a shared emotional event. Because when people are scared, they look for an anchor. Antony offers them one, Mourning gives fear a shape. It gives panic a direction. It tells the crowd who the victim is and who the villains are without needing a complicated explanation. And once the crowd accepts that story, the conspirators' liberator narrative starts to sound hollow, even offensive. Antony's countermove is narrative warfare. He treats Rome like a theater, and he knows exactly how to play it. He speaks in a way that doesn't ask the crowd to think. It asks the crowd to feel. He brings Caesar back to life as an idea generous, protective, wronged. He reminds people of what Caesar gave them and what Caesar promised. He pushes the crowd toward a single emotional conclusion. They didn't kill a tyrant. They killed your protector. And once that idea lands, the atmosphere shifts. Now the conspirators aren't saviors. They're butchers. Now the Republic doesn't look restored. It looks hijacked. Now Caesar's killers aren't brave. They're ungrateful elites who couldn't stand sharing power with a man the people loved. This is the moment the conspirators lose what they needed most: moral legitimacy. They thought Brutus's reputation would protect them. They thought the clean name would act like armor. But no reputation can survive a city that has decided it's grieving, not celebrating. And grief is contagious. As Antony pushes the emotional narrative, Rome begins to move. Not in a neat political alignment, but in waves of anger and fear. The conspirators discover they can't hold the streets. They can't hold the crowd. They can't even hold the meaning of the word freedom, because Antony has redefined the event. He has turned Caesar into a martyr. And martyrdom has a way of multiplying a man's power after death. That is the dark twist of this entire story. Caesar becomes stronger the moment he dies. And while Antony is turning grief into force, there is another figure entering the story like a slow-burning fuse. Octavian. At this point, Octavian is still young, not physically imposing, not the kind of man who looks like he will dominate a nation. If you didn't know what he becomes, you might look at him and think, he can't be the future. But Rome is full of men who look like the future and collapse. Octavian's advantage is that he doesn't look inevitable yet. He looks like a detail, like a side character, and then the will is read. This is where the word son becomes real in the most legally explosive way. Caesar has adopted Octavian as his heir, not as a casual gesture, but as a political act that transfers a name, a legacy, and a claim. Suddenly, Octavian isn't just a young relative. He is Caesar's son in the Roman sense that matters most, the official sense. And that changes the entire board. Because now Caesar's death is not just the end of a man. It's the beginning of an inheritance fight. It's a fight over Caesar's money, Caesar's loyal veterans, Caesar's political network, and most importantly, Caesar's image. Octavian steps into Rome with a purpose that is colder than grief. He is not just mourning. He is calculating. He is reading the city the way a gambler reads a table. He understands what the conspirators failed to understand. After a political murder, the public doesn't reward virtue. The public rewards strength and clarity. And Octavian offers clarity. He offers a simple idea. Caesar's killers must pay. Caesar's legacy must continue. Caesar's supporters must have a leader. That's the terrifying part. Octavian doesn't need to invent a movement. the movement already exists. It's the loyalty Caesar built through charisma, money, favors, and war. It's the emotional attachment that people have to Caesar as a symbol of stability and generosity. It's the fear the elite has of Caesar's veterans. It's all already there, waiting for someone to inherit it. Octavian walks into that inheritance like a man taking possession of a loaded weapon, and he is careful. At first, he doesn't try to outshine Antony in public emotion. Antony is the older man, the louder man, the one who looks like Caesar's natural successor. Octavian doesn't compete with that image directly. Instead, he builds something more durable. Legitimacy, Antony can perform grief. Octavian can say, "I am the son." Those words are not sentimental. They are strategic. In Rome, being Caesar's adopted son means you can claim Caesar's name as a political banner. It means you can speak as if Caesar's will is still alive, just transferred. It means you can attract Caesar's supporters not through personality, but through inheritance. This is why the assassination doesn't kill. Caesarism. It spreads it. Caesarism is not just loyalty to Caesar the man. It's loyalty to what Caesar represents. A strong, central figure who can cut through chaos, reward supporters, punish enemies, and provide stability in a system that feels broken. When Caesar is alive, Caesarism is one man's personal power. When Caesar is dead, Caesarism becomes a cause, and causes are harder to kill than people. The conspirators believed they could remove the danger by removing Caesar. What they did instead was remove the only part of Caesarism that could be negotiated with, Caesar himself. Now there is no single living person the cynic can bargain with to restore normal. Now there are factions, veterans, crowds, ambitious men. And the most dangerous leaders in Rome can now say, "We are acting in Caesar's name." That is a terrifying kind of authority, because it feels righteous. It feels like justice. It feels like finishing what Caesar started, and that's exactly what begins to happen. The conspirators find themselves trapped. They wanted to be the heroes of a clean political story, but Rome is demanding a different kind of ending. Rome is demanding consequences, revenge, and a leader who can prevent the city from sliding into full collapse. Antony pushes the emotional fire. Octavian steps closer with the legal claim, and the killers, standing on the other side, realize that their act has not restored the Republic. It has shattered the balance of fear that kept the peace. Now every powerful man in Rome has to decide, do you align with Caesar's memory, or do you risk being labeled his enemy? And being labeled Caesar's enemy is suddenly dangerous, not just socially, but physically. Because Caesar's supporters are not theoretical. They are organized. They are angry. They are armed. This is the moment the son theme becomes chilling. Brutus was the son whose reputation made the assassination possible, but Octavian is the son who turns the assassination into a long war. A war not just of armies, but of narratives. Who was Caesar? A tyrant who had to die, or a father of Rome who was murdered? Who are the conspirators? Liberators or aristocrats protecting their privilege? Who has the right to lead now? The Senate or the heir? In the days after the Ides of March, Rome is no longer choosing between Caesar and the Republic. Rome is choosing between chaos and control. And the conspiracy has accidentally made control look more appealing than ever. So when you hear the phrase, "they killed Caesar," remember what it really means in the bigger story. They killed the man, yes, but they also turned him into a symbol that others could carry like a torch. And the torch is about to be used to burn the Republic down. Next, the story expands outward into open conflict. Because once Octavian steps into Caesar's name, and once Antony turns grief into a weapon, the conspirators don't get a peaceful debate. They get a countdown to civil war, to propaganda, to betrayal, and to the brutal question that decides who wins history. Who gets to inherit a dead man's power after Caesar's death? Rome doesn't settle into peace. It doesn't even settle into a clear argument. It fractures into a fight over meaning, and then that fight turns into a fight over force. Because once the Republic's rules fail to prevent a murder in the Senate, everyone learns the same lesson at the same time. The old system cannot protect anyone anymore. In that world, being right is not enough. You have to be able to win. Brutus finds that out almost immediately. He thought the assassination would restore the Republic, or at least give the Senate the courage to take power back. Instead, it makes him a target. The streets don't welcome him like a liberator. They look at him like a man who stabbed the city's strongest pillar and then expected the building not to shake. As public emotion tilts towards Caesar's memory, Brutus realizes he can't simply stay in Rome and talk his way through it. The city is too volatile. Antony's messaging is too effective, and Caesar's supporters are too angry. So Brutus leaves. And that choice is the beginning of his transformation, because the moment he leaves politics behind and begins to build military power, he becomes the thing he claims to oppose. This is the cruel paradox of the late Republic. If you want to defend the Republic, you have to fight like a warlord. If you want to preserve the system, you have to break its normal limits. The Republic, at this stage, is like a man trying to win a street fight by quoting the rulebook. Brutus starts gathering allies and resources, building a campaign under the banner of liberty. He wants to present himself as a man of principle, but war does not cooperate with principle. War demands money. War demands loyalty. War demands decisions that hurt people. And every time Brutus takes a step deeper into martial politics, his image starts to split in two to his supporters. He is a liberator, raising an army to protect Rome from tyranny. To his enemies, he is a hypocrite, using the language of freedom while marching with force. And the worst part is that both views contain truth. Brutus tries to hold on to moral purity like it's a shield, but moral purity is heavy. It slows you down. It makes you hesitate. It makes you negotiate with people who are not negotiating. It makes you assume others care about ideals the way you do. Rome, at this moment, does not care the way Brutus cares. Rome cares about survival. Meanwhile, Octavian is changing in a different direction. When he first enters the scene, he is easy to underestimate. He is young. He has health issues. He does not look like the kind of man who will command armies and bend the Senate to his will. That is the mask history gives him for free, because Rome wants to believe the future will look like the past older men. Famous names, obvious strongmen. Octavian's genius is that he uses that underestimation as cover while he builds something far more dangerous than a reputation. He builds a machine. Octavian understands that Caesar's name is not just a memory. It is a political resource. It attracts veterans, money, fear, and loyalty. It gives him a legal and emotional claim that no speech can create from scratch. But Octavian also understands that being the heir is not enough. It's a key, not the door. He still has to seize control of the actual levers of power. And the levers of power in Rome are held by men who do not want to hand them to a teenager. So Octavian does what Brutus struggles to do. He adapts. He learns Rome's real language, and that language is leverage. He makes deals with people he doesn't like. He flatters men he intends to replace. He uses the Senate when it serves him and pressures it when it resists him. He acts humble when it helps, and he acts firm when it's time to remind Rome that Caesar's veterans are listening. This is the transformation. Octavian goes from Caesar's adopted son to something colder, a calculating political predator who can smile while he closes the trap. And this is where the contrast between Brutus and Octavian becomes the emotional engine of the war. Brutus is trying to be good. Octavian is trying to be effective. Brutus wants his actions to be pure, so history will judge him kindly. Octavian wants history itself to be his possession, something he can edit, control, and rewrite. Brutus keeps asking, what is the right thing? Octavian keeps asking, what works? That difference doesn't just shape their personalities, it shapes their outcomes. Because the late Republic rewards men who can organize force and control narratives. It punishes men who need the world to be fair before they can move confidently. As the factions harden, Rome becomes a courtroom without a judge. Everyone is accusing everyone. Everyone is claiming to be the true defender of the Republic, or the true heir of Caesar, or the true savior of order. But there is no neutral authority left to decide what's legitimate. Legitimacy has become something you seize, not something you receive. And this is where alliances start forming the way they always form in collapsing systems. Not around shared values, but around shared threats. Octavian's relationship with Antony becomes especially tense, because both men want to stand in Caesar's shadow and call it inheritance. Antony has seniority, charisma, and a proven presence in public life. Octavian has legality, the adopted name, and the quiet ruthlessness. To wait until the timing is perfect. They can cooperate for a while, but they can't share the same crown forever. Even before it becomes open conflict, you can feel the distrust in every move. In Rome, partnerships are often just slow betrayals. On the other side, Brutus and his allies try to hold the Liberator coalition together. But coalitions built on ideals are fragile when the battlefield starts demanding hard decisions. Soldiers don't fight for abstract purity forever. They fight for pay, for leadership, for confidence. They fight for the sense that someone is steering the ship. Brutus wants to be seen as a statesman, but war keeps forcing him to be a commander, and commanding men means giving orders that don't always look virtuous. It means punishing weakness. It means demanding loyalty. It means taking resources from people who don't want to give them. This is where Brutus begins to lose control of his own image, and that is more dangerous to him than losing territory. Because Brutus's strength was always moral authority. Once his opponents successfully paint him as just another warlord, the conspiracy's original moral argument starts to collapse. Octavian, in contrast, is comfortable living without moral purity. He understands a simple rule. If you control the future, you control the story about the past. If you win, your actions become necessary. If you lose, your actions become criminal. So he focuses on winning as war escalates. Betrayal becomes normal. Deals get made and broken. Promises last until they become inconvenient. Men who once swore friendship turn on each other with polite language and sharp knives. Rome's political culture, already brutal, becomes fully feral because now the stakes are not just office and honor. The stakes are life and extinction. This is what happens when a republic becomes a battleground for secession. It stops being a system and becomes a prize.
Brutus tries to keep the moral frame alive, but the moral frame keeps slipping. Every new crisis forces him into choices that look less like liberty and more like control. And the more he tightens his grip to keep his side together, the more he resembles the very thing he claims he's fighting against. That's the tragedy of Brutus. He is trying to save a republic that no longer exists in practice. He's fighting for a memory of Rome, not the reality of it. The reality is that power has already shifted from institutions to individuals, from law to loyalty, from debates to armies. Once that shift happens, the republic becomes a beautiful idea with no muscles. Octavian sees this clearly. He doesn't mourn the republic the way Brutus does, because he doesn't need it emotionally. He needs a stable structure that he can lead. If the republic can't provide stability, he will build something else. And unlike Brutus, he is willing to pay the moral price of building it. This is where the inevitability begins to take shape, not as fate, but as math. Organized force beats scattered ideals. A single chain of command beats a coalition of competing consciences. A leader who can promise stability beats leaders who can only promise virtue. The Republic's ideals cannot compete with the kind of machine Octavian is building, because ideals don't recruit veterans the way inheritance does. Ideals don't pay salaries. Ideals don't intimidate enemies into surrender. Ideals don't stop opportunists from switching sides when the wind changes. And the wind is changing. As the conflict drags on, Rome becomes exhausted. People don't want philosophical purity anymore. They want an ending. They want the violence to stop. They want someone to take control and make the future predictable again. That desire becomes Octavian's greatest ally. Because once a population begins to value order over liberty, the man who can deliver order becomes irresistible, even if he has to reshape morality to do it. Brutus, in this stage, is still trying to be the liberator history asked for, but he is fighting opponents who are not trying to be admired. They are trying to win and survive. Brutus is trying to convince Rome he is the moral choice. Octavian is making sure Rome doesn't get a choice at all. By the time the final confrontations approach, the story has shifted far away from the Senate chamber where Caesar fell. The knives began the collapse, but the war is finishing it. And the saddest part is that both sides can tell themselves they are acting for Rome, because Rome has become a word everyone uses to justify the thing they wanted to do anyway. This is why history feels like a courtroom here. Everyone is arguing. Everyone is presenting their case. Everyone is calling themselves the hero. But there is no judge. Only outcomes. Only the man left standing. And as we move into the final chapter of this conflict, the real question becomes impossible to avoid. If Brutus is the son who helped kill Caesar in the name of the Republic, and Octavian is the son who claims Caesar in the name of order, then which inheritance actually survives? Because in the end, Rome won't be ruled by the best argument. It will be ruled by the strongest structure. And Octavian is building one that doesn't need the Republic to exist at all. So after all the blood, all the speeches, all the betrayals, we come back to the question that started this story. Who was Julius Caesar's greatest enemy? Most people want a single name, a single face, a single moment. That's how we like history when we're trying to understand it fast. But Caesar's downfall doesn't fit into one clean villain because Caesar wasn't destroyed in just one way. He was destroyed in layers, like a man being attacked from two directions at once. One enemy ended his life. Another enemy ended his world. If you're answering in most literal sense, the name is Brutus. Brutus is the son by intimacy, mentorship, and symbolism. Not a biological son, but something Rome often treated as just as powerful. A man Caesar lifted up, trusted, and honored in public. A man whose reputation made him look like the conscience of a senate. Brutus didn't just help kill Caesar's body. He helped kill the idea that Caesar was untouchable. Caesar could defeat armies and survive civil wars, but he could not survive being surrounded by familiar faces in a room built for law and then betrayed by a man the public saw as honorable. That is why Brutus's blade lands differently than the others. It doesn't just cut flesh, it cuts the myth. Brutus also represents something Caesar could never fully control: pride dressed up as virtue. Caesar's mercy created debts, and those debts created resentment, and resentment created a hunger to prove independence. In that sense, Brutus is the most personal enemy Caesar ever faced, because Brutus isn't a foreign general or a rival warlord. Brutus is the consequence of Caesar's own style of power. He is what happens when a leader tries to turn politics into a household and assumes the sons will remain grateful forever. Brutus shows that closeness is not safety. Sometimes closeness is exactly what makes betrayal possible. But if you're asking who ultimately defeated Caesar's project, the answer becomes darker. Because Caesar's project was not just winning a civil war or holding office. Caesar's project was reshaping Rome so that power no longer depended on the old republican balance. He was building a system where the state could be directed by one central will, one central network, one central story. Caesar didn't just want to survive. He wanted to last. He wanted Rome to continue in a form that made his choices permanent. And that is where Octavian becomes the second, more complicated answer. Octavian is the son by adoption and legacy, the legal heir who turns Caesar's name into a machine that can keep running even after the man is dead. Brutus ends Caesar's life, but Octavian uses Caesar's death as fuel. He takes the grief, the anger, the loyalty, and the fear that Caesar left behind, and he turns it into organized power. He doesn't just punish the conspirators. He makes the Republic itself look like the problem that caused the chaos. He makes people crave control more than they crave liberty. He fulfills Caesar's path, then pushes it further, until Rome becomes something the Republic was designed to prevent. That's why Caesar's assassination becomes almost meaningless in the long view. Not meaningless emotionally, not meaningless as a turning point, but meaningless in the sense the conspirators feared most. It doesn't restore what they wanted. They kill Caesar to save the Republic, and the Republic still dies. The killing doesn't end Caesarism. It spreads it. It teaches Rome a lesson that future emperors will use for centuries. If you can control the story and control the force behind it, the old rules become optional. Caesar's enemies tried to stop a monarchy and ended up accelerating it. So, who is Caesar's greatest enemy, really? The honest answer is that it wasn't only Brutus, and it wasn't only Octavian. It was succession. It was the problem that haunts every system built around one extraordinary person. When a state becomes dependent on a single man's authority, it becomes fragile in a specific way. The moment that man is gone, everyone rushes to fill the space, and the fight over who's next becomes more violent than the fight that created the space in the first place. Caesar could win battles, but he couldn't solve the human math of inheritance. He couldn't stop protégés from becoming rivals. He couldn't stop loyalty from turning into competition. He couldn't stop the word son from becoming a weapon. In Rome, a son is not just a child. A son is a claim, a successor, a threat, a future that can rewrite the past. Brutus and Octavian are like two answers to the same question, two outcomes created by the same environment. Brutus is what happens when the Republic's moral mythology collides with Caesar's personal power. Octavian is what happens when Caesar's personal power outgrows the Republic entirely and then finds a new body to live in. Brutus kills the man. Octavian inherits the force. And Rome, caught between them, learns that there's no clean way back to what it used to be. So here is the haunting question that lingers after the credits, the one that makes this story feel modern no matter how old it is. If power turns protégés into heirs and heirs into rivals, can any empire avoid being destroyed by its own family? Or is every system built around one towering figure, secretly building the same weapon inside its own house, just waiting for the moment it gets picked up?